those topics where I feel like I am constantly trying to keep up, and I'm probably nowhere near the level of knowledge that I should be for the everyday job. I'm guessing that a lot of you are probably in that same boat, or hoping that you are so that I don't feel all alone by myself on that boat. Either way, we are all in luck because today, on the inaugural episode of Cutting Through the Noise, we're going to cut through some of the internet noise regarding AI and get right to the chase about where we even get started with AI. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our very first guest host to the show, Chris Stegh from E-Group. Chris, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Josh. It's great to be on your program. I look forward to watching in the future.
I'm not looking forward to going back and watching myself because I always hate doing that. It's one of those exercises of cringiness that just happens in life, but it's the nature of being on video. So, really quick intro, okay? For those that maybe aren't as familiar with you, can you give people your name and, of course, I just mentioned you're with E-Group, but your role there and a little bit of the background.
Thanks. I'm our CTO. I've been with the firm about 18 years. I was an electrical engineer by trade, so I like to reverse engineer and create certain things. And that's why I got into AI, because 2 years ago I was puzzled by all this apparently magic stuff worked, and in some cases didn't. And that's why I've delved deep into that. A week and a half ago or so, I was awarded the Microsoft MVP Award for Copilot. So look forward to collaborating with you and other MVPs in the future too.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's congratulations on that. It's a fun, exciting, cool thing, and of course, Copilot is one of those newer category areas, right? So it's kind of cool to be brought in and leading the way with that. So huge congrats on it, and it's of course one of the many reasons why you are on as our guest host for this particular topic today. Because I just, putting the MVP piece aside, I've been following what you've been putting on LinkedIn for some time. You're one of those people that has helped to dispel some of the mystery around AI for me. But even with that, I still feel a bit new to the topic, a little green. And I think a lot of other people out there are in that same boat where it's an avalanche of AI everything, where they just don't know where to get started getting started. So that's what we're here for today. But before we jump into that, you are as I mentioned in our pre-show recording comments, you're a bit of a guinea pig today because not only are you the guest host, but I'm trying a few interesting things to make this podcast different. And the first is going to be a segment that I don't know if we keep the name or not, but it's show and tell, right? It's a way for those that are out there watching to get to know me, to get to know you. And I really think back to like grade school era, the whole show and tell thing was kind of a good way to get some of the inside scoop on what was going on with the different kids in the class. And so I'll do a little bit myself, but I've asked you to do something weird for a podcast and find an item to kind of share a little bit about who you are. Really not totally related to AI or what we're talking about today, but just something unique to you. What did you come up with?
Well, I love music. Always listening to something new, streaming these days. Remember buying my first big radio and stereo at the age of 16. It was like $800 Sony. The thing was massive. But I go way back. This was a gift that I'll show and tell from my father, who had taken this radio from our family's home. That was 1940s. This thing was built. There's vacuum tubes in there. What fascinated me about the radio was that you can actually, with this old piece of equipment, listen to radio from Europe and Japan. It's not like I have an antenna connected to it on the front of the house. It is just this piece, which back in the day was pretty darn magic. So there you go.
That is amazing. So the cool thing I like about this right now is that you're kind of setting the bar, right, in terms of other people that now have to follow and bring something cool. That's going to be a big one to top right there. That's a piece of history, as well as just a cool thing about the past. So,
well, what about you? What you got to show and tell?
Yeah, so this is not my first podcast, actually. I kind of found my way into the community back in the day. A mentor gave me the advice to find something that you like doing. Don't just start creating content for the sake of it, but find something that helps you learn, a medium that helps you learn that you enjoy doing and that's easy for you to share stuff. I tried blogging and I tried writing an ebook at one point, etc. And I did all that, but really what resonated with me was creating content on video. So I launched a little, back in the day it was the Skype for B recap. It became the Teams recap. And but when I went to do my first episode of that, I was looking on the camera and thinking, wow, I'm having a really funky hair day. What do I do about that? And my wife had just gotten me a Christmas gift, a cowboy hat. She's from Texas, right? And so I thought, you know what? No one knows who I am in this community or online at this point. I'm just going to throw this on. It'll be something different, unique. And from a personal branding perspective, it kind of stuck. I got pigeonholed into the hat for a long time. Anytime anyone saw me and realized who I was, they'd be like, well, where's the hat? And it was, that was always the thing. So this was around for quite a long time. I have abused it, took it for a swim over the years. It's not quite the same hat that it was, but I keep it around for history's sake there.
Now about 20 times more people remember who you are that you've shown the hat.
I know, yeah, exactly. There was probably at least 75% of the audience was like, who is this guy again? Oh, the hat guy. That's right. That's one of those personal branding 101 things. You can pick something to help people remember you by, but that might be the only thing they remember. So be careful what you choose. Awesome. So appreciate you playing ball and picking an object. That's awesome. Let's actually talk about some of the things that people might have tuned in for now that they get a little bit of piece of who you and I are. Let's talk about AI, and I am saying that in general because it is such a wide open topic. But the title here was, how do I even get started? How do I even get started getting started with AI? Because I think that's the struggle that a lot of people have. It's the struggle I feel even though I know a bit about AI and what we're going to talk about today. I still feel like I need to learn a lot more, and I don't even know where to start with that. So the first question I've got for you is, if someone else were in my shoes, and even more so, they were very green, this is day one of their deciding they're going to wade into figuring out this whole AI thing that the internet is buzzing about, what would you, as an expert in the area, recommend that they start with? A course or a book? What would be starting point number one?
I wouldn't go that far. I would get practical application of it right away. I would think to anytime you go to Google and you plan on searching the internet, instead go to Google's Gemini or go to ChatGPT or Claude from Anthropic. These are the main three premier forward-thinking frontier models that are now based on large language models. And instead of asking Google and poking around, ask an LLM, and you'll find that it'll save time. It'll be more responsive and a heck of a lot more fun.
I love that. That's a really practical approach to this, right? It's not, hey, go out and sit down for this 5-hour course, and then you'll have gotten, which could be helpful, but it's getting your hands on from moment one is huge. A lot of talk has happened around the cost of some of the tools out there. The things you just mentioned, though, is this like when you equate that to going out and using a search engine, are those tools going to be a free of charge way for someone to dip that first toe into the water?
As long as you're willing to sign the terms and conditions that say that your information can be used to train the models, yes, those three are free.
Right.
In the context of keeping your information completely private, I'm a wonk at that. You can pay, and their terms will be a little tighter around what they'll do with your data. But yeah, those three are great. My first experience was in January of 2023 when I was headed to Alaska to visit our customer there, and I wanted to try to see the Northern Lights. So I simply asked ChatGPT, what's the best way to see Northern Lights from Anchorage? And it gave me 4 parks or mountaintops or glaciers that I could go visit to try to see the Northern Lights. And I looked at that and I interacted with it 3 or 4 times to narrow in on that. I said, well, how far is that one from downtown? How far is this one? What are my odds of seeing it? And it really gave me enough, like a travel expert in the area, to go out and try to see it. The clouds were overhead that night, so I missed it.
Yeah.
But and anyway, I thought to myself, man, I would have probably had to click 7 or 8 different BS travel blogs to get the same info, and I got it in about 10 minutes. I saved it to my phone, and I kept it for that night. and I tried to go out and look. I was kind of an idiot walking around the glacier in my work shoes, slipping around. Well, not exactly a local, but that kind of experience opened my eyes to it. Lately, I had a similar use case where I had my dishwasher wouldn't drain. I took a picture of the code that was displayed there, and sure enough, it was pump that in as a picture to a model, and it said, you've got an error with the drain, here are some things you can do about it. Opened up my cupboard, looked under the sink, put the tube higher so that the gravity helped the water drain into the sink tube, and I'm back in business. So anything that you would have otherwise gone to YouTube for or struggled looking around and poking at internet sites is a great way to use public and free Gen AI.
I mean, so the key there, it sounds like, is simplification and time saving right out the gate. And I think that's a great suggestion. If people were to get started, this lets them see immediately how to get started by putting your fingers on the solution without any kind of giant learning curve. But you threw out a couple terms that lead me right into the next question here. So that's great. You know, you mentioned LLMs, a couple different things. I think that's an important thing that people tend to feel lost with, right? They hear these terms thrown out, they're foreign terms, they don't want to feel weird for having to ask what they are when they feel like everybody else knows what they're talking about, even though everybody else doesn't always know. But it's a great place, assuming that, well, your great suggestion is great and people definitely should do that. Assuming this is stop number one for them, this podcast, and they're stopping here to say, okay, I want to get started with AI. Let's hear what these guys have to say about it. Let's make our baseline some of these first terms. You said LLM, which is large language models. What does that even mean?
It is a OpenAI, which makes chat a massive computer to suck in information from anything and everything they can get their hands on. Internet sites, transcripts, free to use books, all kinds of issues with copyright might come to mind, because anything on the internet that's not copyright is still. The neural network is a very in, and therefore when you ask a question of an AI, it will assemble the sentence that it thinks it wants you to hear or see based on the question that you've asked. And so it'll use these large language models with all this intel to create a nearly perfectly sounding answer. The rough part about that in many cases, for those of you that know what the word hallucinations mean or conflations, these are errors that the machine makes in misinterpreting what you really wanted to hear. So if that happens, simply try again with a different prompt, and that will likely clear up the miscommunication.
And so the training that goes into these models, then, because you have things like hallucinations, and it's a training and ongoing process for these models to help continue to weed out those hallucinations where they're reported, or how does that work?
Yeah, it keeps getting better and better. They're first very expensive to train these things. For months, a computer has to chug and plug in all these various sources of data. This currently costs hundreds of $millions of dollars. If we're on the trajectory toward artificial general intelligence, we're looking at a $1 billion training run. DeepSeek, of course, had their moment where they told the world it doesn't cost that much if you do it smartly, and they were able to do it in a much more efficient trajectory. So there's innovations in the efficiencies too, but in general, intelligence is the log of compute, which is Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI's mantra. So these massive computers take in more and more massive amounts of data, and they train it, and therefore you get the benefit of the all-knowing internet, for better when you ask it questions or interact with it.
I think it's a good moment to pause right there before we go to the next term, and just kind of, for those of you watching, if you are green to it and you are like trying to start soaking some of this in, not all the things that we're defining here are stuff you got to keep at the forefront of your mind to use the technology, right? This is giving you a base to kind of understand what we mean, how it builds on the whole solution, and we'll get to some of the practicality in just a minute. But this is a great place when you hear these terms, because they're thrown out like crazy on LinkedIn and everywhere else. This is what they mean, right? This is a good general idea of what they mean. The next one I've got is generative AI. And I think this kind of goes beyond the general large language model to something that is a little more specific to what people are going to start using. What does generative AI mean?
Well, generative AI is a couple things. You're talking about a couple so far with these models that I've mentioned, but it can be more than just words and language that these things can produce. The other well-known and popular use of Gen AI is to generate media, not just pictures now, but there are tools that will allow you to create pretty doggone awesome video. And at the same time, there are different models that are very, very specifically trained on code. GitHub Copilot's a good example where the training set isn't the whole internet, it's more coding principles and real working code. The more specific the model's data, the better the output. The more general purpose, the more likely they are to misconstrue what you really wanted and give you something that you need to reprompt to get to the right answer. But in the context of pictures, things like Midjourney and DALL-E 3 are very popular and pretty awesome. Sora's OpenAI's video content creator, which will really rock the world when it comes to the layperson creating 35 millimeter quality video.
No kidding. It's I mean, you LinkedIn and other places, you see it right now all over the place. People are, that had maybe struggled to find that catchy image or something before. They'll spend a few moments trying a few different terms, 2 or 3 different prompts to get the picture they want that kind of represents what they're trying to. It's all over the place, and it's some of it's pretty impressive. Some of it you got to work at a little bit, and some of it is just come a long way. And I saw one headline the other day, speaking of video, that was talking about it was something being reported that within a year they're saying you'll be able to get Hollywood quality style videos, full length videos out there by AI completely at that stage. And it's hard to believe we're at that stage in reality where AI can create something that realistic, that in depth. AI assistant is kind of, I think, the next step there when we talk about generative AI and what it does. What does an AI assistant insinuate? How does that come into people's work and personal lives?
I think it's some computer-based engine that helps you get some work done or some answers to questions. We're all used to Siri and Alexa and the Google Home Assistant. These are early forms of them. What's different about the new iPhone is Apple Intelligence, which instead of a Google-like search engine, which is how Alexa and Siri worked, now Siri ties into OpenAI's ChatGPT database so that its answers aren't so short and sweet, or with Google Home, I'm often puzzled why it just doesn't tell me the whole answer, but it points me to some website. Well, it's because it's an old version and doesn't have access to the large language model. Now these questions won't be so much pointers to websites or quick answers. They'll be complete answers with a language-based back end. So I think the new way that the industry is now calling AI assistants is also things like Microsoft Copilot, which is like a bolt-on to your Office experience, which helps facilitate the things that used to take clicks or hours instead of minutes with LLMs behind Office and Microsoft 365 Copilot. That's a new breed of these assistants that are coming in.
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more table stakes, right? We see, obviously, Copilot's been out there for a bit, and there's constantly new things being released for it. And every other platform provider out there is kind of coming to the table with their own version of the AI companion with Zoom, etc. But yeah, very, very good. It's great to see that it's an assistant of sorts that across various types of platforms with different types of inputs. And now that we're moving beyond just the search engine styled data sets, we're coming to a more interesting place with it. And the last term I want to cover before we jump into a couple things is agentic AI, which sounds very futuristic. What does that mean?
In short, to compare it to the more traditional use of artificial intelligence, Gen AI, where I am sitting at a prompt and I'm typing something, agents can substitute the human in that process and just get work done. So I'm able to step out of the loop in some cases by using an agent. So it's software, essentially, that's programmed to do something. I think in more general terms, it's automation. So those that are familiar with things like Power Automate or Azure Logic apps are going to think there's this kind of mixed up terminology. It's very similar. And the beauty of the Gen AI agents, though, is that I can create one without having to do low or even any code. I can simply declare what I want the agent to do and give it a few instructions in human language, and then it'll go off and do its thing. So that's the big game changer. As opposed to having to know some flow charting and if then else kind of programming, I now can just tell it how I want it to act, and the agent can take over for me.
I love the way you kind of boiled it down to simpler terms, right? In terms of its software and its automation. And I think that's an important thing to underscore for those getting started in the space is, again, hearing some of these terms, starting to learn more about them can feel cumbersome, can feel overwhelming. But if you understand at the end of the day, this is just kind of an evolution of these concepts you're already familiar with. And understanding what it does, what the purpose is, that's key to being able to move forward and use it. So
yeah, a lot of things are being reinvented or recast with the large language model on the back end, but to differentiate them from past capabilities, we just call them different things.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to play a quick sound here. Now that sound signals that we're toward the middle of our show, and we are going to do a quick segment where we take a break from everything we're talking about and get back to being humans for a second and talking about things that we would talk about over a drink somewhere. And this is called Pause, Rest, and Rant. We are taking a break from the AI topic, and I'm going to introduce a rant topic here. I'd love to get your take on it. But something that really just drives me nuts as a human being is when I go to the grocery store and there's this big open aisle for people to go down, and there is one person down that aisle, and they have left their cart smack dab in the middle of that aisle, and then they've gone off to look at something else halfway down the aisle. And I can't get by because their cart's just blocking the whole thing. Am I the only one that drives nuts? What is your take on it?
Oh, man. Well, I'm going to go right off of that because I no longer go to the store to shop.
I wondered if you go there.
I have everything. I've had everything delivered since 2019, so I was kind of an early adopter. I guess my pet peeve is when they are out of stock of something that's important like coffee, and I was counting on that and actually have to leave the house.
Yeah. And anyone that's watching at this moment is probably thinking this, why are you still going to the grocery store? I don't understand why you're doing that. It was... Yeah, we've moved to kind of halfway doing ordering and doing pickups, etc. And sometimes I just like to still old-fashioned go into the store to shop for things, and then I run into that person who's left their cart in the middle of the aisle, and I'm like, why am I here? Why am I doing this to myself? Anyway, that is our very first pause, rest, and rant. Let's go ahead and reserve normal programming and get back to talking about AI. Thank you for humoring me on that.
My AI pet peeve, by the way, is when people obviously use a generative tool and they just copy and paste it without making it their own. You saw my post the other day about if it starts with "in this fast-paced digital world."
Yes.
I stopped reading. Sorry, guys. Your blog didn't hit home with my human nature, so watch that.
That's important, right? Because that signals that as much as you know on the topic and as much as you're learning and using the technology, there's still an inherent human desire to consume things that are humanly fashioned, right? And so even when you're using these tools to aid what you're doing and move forward, when you detect the authenticity or the human touch to something, that draws you closer to it. It makes you connect with it. It makes you want to consume it more. And I think that it's a good thing to keep in focus through this whole AI conversation is these are great tools that can be used for various purposes. But as soon as we take our hands fully off the wheel and we leave the human out of it, that's where we're going to run into some problems.
Yeah, although there are some novel things that will tickle your fancy when you try them for the first time. And I'm not sure these will last in the long term because I kind of agree with you around with all the machines doing all the work, eventually the people will be more important or still be more important, excuse me. But there is a tool called Notebook LM. If you upload a blog, or in my case, I uploaded part of my book, and it simulates a podcast. The voice, by the way, sounds just like the guy from This Week in Tech. It's like a spot on. And then there's a female colleague of his, and they banter back and forth. They joke around about your book. They will really put it in a interesting podcast light, really conversational. So there are things that, in my view, though, are just like, wow, here we go.
Yeah,
It's gonna be
yeah.
great.
No, there. I mean, it certainly there's a lot where it's novel. It's a novel thing, so it can just sit
Yeah.
back and blow your mind on the technology level there. But I'm. That is one thing. The irony of this show, right, is I want to cover topics like this, like AI, where so much of the world is changing around us, but cling desperately to the human part of it and bring that forward in the show. So
Amen.
it's a good call out. I'm glad you brought up your own pet peeve. That's maybe how I should tweak that segment moving forward. Is I'm bringing a pet peeve or a rant to the show, and my guest host can do the same. I like that. Okay, let's jump back in. So we kind of covered our bases. We laid the table for some of the initial terms, what it means to say generative AI and AI assistants. Hopefully, we have a good starting point. Let's talk about some of the more practical things here. Now, you've already mentioned things like ChatGPT, Claude. I'll throw Grok out there. There's all these different tools to be used. Are these all pretty much? Because I have a sense that most people have heard these as well, even if they don't quite know much about them. Are these all pretty much kind of along the same lines? Are these all just tools that you're going to interact with and feed a prompt into, and it's going to generate something back to you, whether that's text or video or a picture?
Yes, although they're racing to differentiate. For instance, Claude 3.7 is the first to combine the general purpose LLM and a reasoning model. A reasoning model is a little more intelligent and will, instead of just spewing an answer, it'll actually ask a question or two to qualify your inquiry so that you're not just getting what it thinks you want to hear, but it may ask you, well, you left this unsaid, or you might have, it might be better if you tell me about your intention of this. So there are differences, and ChatGPT, of course, includes DALL-E 3, which some of them don't include the generator. But in all, for the general purpose user, they're about all the same. There will, of course, be fierce competition and differentiation in that space. And then there's, of course, only really two that are enterprise class, one Microsoft 365 Copilot and one Google's Gemini that's now bolted into the workplace, which are essentially the enterprise coupling with the apps that you use every day for email and chat and the like.
Right.
As a rule.
Okay, good. So we've got kind of know how they, and it's interesting to see how that fight will continue. We're kind of used to that with a lot of other instances of applications and tools, right? You've got, well, I chose this this email app versus this email app because it kind of does this extra thing or tackles notifying me in this way that's different. There's just different examples of that. So I think it'll be different, and it will be more interesting to keep up with the AI tools because it does seem like I saw a great meme the other day talking about how it's like, hey, yeah, this is this is the AI romance of the week. It's amazing. Look at all these cool things it did. Major announcement. In 7 hours, there will be the next thing that's the new AI romance of the week, and it's going to do a whole bunch of new cool things, and that's what everyone's going to be obsessed with. So it is fast paced. It's moving really quickly, but it's good to get to know what those are. Talking about them and how they might be used and how they're going to differentiate, let's talk about some of those practical use cases. For those that are like, okay, great, I'm starting to get some of this stuff, I'm understanding. Now I want to pivot to how am I going to use this in my life? You already started the conversation out with providing a great example. Go out to one of these freely available tools, accept the terms, and start just asking them for things, asking you stuff that you would normally do in a search engine. Do that. Another area where I'll give an example really quick that I've done, and this is small and simple, but when you go into Outlook or even Teams and you start to search in Outlook or Teams to find that message or that bit of a knowledge or that booking that you can't remember where it was and where that information went to, it can be really a headache. As good as the search engines within might be, it can be a real headache to finally find what you want. It can take a long time. I have started pulling up Copilot alongside, and whether in Teams or wherever, and said, hey, where is that conversation or message about this with this person? Boom. Comes right back up after a couple seconds. Oh, that was an email, and here it is. Here's what you need to know. And all that time spent tweaking my search terms and searching was just done automatically is a beautiful thing. And so I'm taking baby steps. That's my example. But what are some real world examples that the average person should get started with beyond the example you gave within their work life, maybe?
Well, for a business person, the first thing I started to do was I had writer's block when it came to writing grabber messages for webinars that I was hosting. And so I would, instead of struggling for the bullet points and the intended audience and getting all that perfect, I would just feed my general thoughts to the LLM and it would give me a 80% start. I filled it in here and there, and I had a beautifully written piece that I could use. My only now tweak to that would be, because it's another obvious sign that it's all AI generated, was after the first 3 or 4 words, it'll put a colon, and then it'll bold the first 3 or 4 words, and then it'll start to write a sentence afterwards. It's an obvious giveaway if you've done it enough. So I generally remove those colons or at least change them to dashes. Pro tip. But you can make it your own in such a way, otherwise it does come off to be canned. The other thing that is massively helpful that I found was and this applies to Zoom and other meeting services too. It's just using that transcript. I was once on a call with a customer. It was an hour-long call. I was taking a few notes, but I missed something, and due to the ability for the AI to have recorded the call, I was able to ask, what did so-and-so say about such and such? It took me right to that spot in the transcript. I recalled what he said, jotted that down in the statement of work that I was creating, and we're off and running. So just the time savings there and the frustration, like you found, of finding something you know exists. But the 3 to 5 minutes that it takes you is so much easier now that you give it some context, suggest who it came from, you're back to business.
That's great examples. I think, right there, it highlights the value immediately. It's getting the creative juices flowing when you maybe are stuck. And then B, you have the time saved, both on what I talked about and what you talked about with the meeting transcript. So many of us spend so much of our time in meetings, and if you're adopting Teams or whatever the case is, your meeting, all of these have some method of doing transcripts and doing summaries now, and then being able to tie into the AI assistant, Copilot, whatever, to then go and get meaningful follow-up action items or summaries or just finding things on the spot.
There's also a commercially available tool that people like, which is Otter AI, which is something you can load on your phone, and then if you're having a covert conversation, you can record from your phone, and that will generate a transcript too. So make sure you're on point if you're at the nightclub having that private conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There you go. Okay, last point I want to dive into here. I was going to kind of dive into an area talking about corporate versus personalized spillover, but I think we've actually covered a really good blend of how these tools are involved in both places already and how you can use them in so many different ways. And the use cases are frankly just changing by the minute and being added onto by the minute. So it's crazy. But let's wrap up the technical part of the conversation with prompting. Now, I'm going to give my probably controversial or unpopular view on prompting here, and then kind of get your more expert opinion on this and what you think. But my problem with prompting has to do with exactly the audience that I'm hoping is watching today being green to the topic. To that audience, that might feel like, oh, I have this new complex thing I need to learn. I kind of almost need to learn a little bit of coding to say the right things in the right way to get the right results. Otherwise, I'm just not getting the value here unless I learn to code, to prompt like a pro. And to me, that's a barrier to entry, right? I think that the ability to adopt easily is going to be relied upon our ability to interact with this without a huge, heavy learning curve. And so that's where I'm a little bit more excited about kind of the ability to interface with a lot of these tools via voice, via natural spoken language, because I think that's going to be a lot more natural to people. You want them to talk to this thing like it's a person and ask it to do something. Well, you shouldn't need to memorize the right way to ask it that, in my opinion. There. But I'm curious your thoughts on that and kind of your advice for people that kind of need to get started with some initial prompting.
Well, don't take it too seriously. These are made to be conversational. The reason why you take a minute to create a more thorough prompt is to define the tone of voice that you want the system to have and the audience that you want it to be written for. For instance, you could tell the LLM that you want to sound like Shakespeare, but make it something that a 5-year-old would understand, versus create a poem in the voice of a robot about a trip to Mars. So there's so many ways that you can now tweak the output. But if you're just asking it, what's wrong with my dishwasher? You can just say, just like you'd be talking to the repair guy, what's wrong with this? And how do I fix it? So there's nothing to it. If you want to make it a more customized and appropriate output, spend a few minutes on the persona that you want it to take and the audience. And if you want to be more specific, say bullets or paragraph or 200 words or 400 words, and you can really start to then narrow down instead of spending too much time trying to fix things. Your first shot might well do it.
Yeah, and there will probably be nuances too, depending on what you're trying to generate, right? You want to generate an answer via text versus a picture with specific things in that picture. Then you might have to get more into the weeds with what you're asking it to do.
You bet.
But good take on it. I always like to throw an adversarial thing out there just to see what the take is going to be. But I'm excited to see a lot of the changes and evolution that's coming when it comes to using voice, because to me, I think that's just going to unlock so much usage for people in the future.
I've experienced a game changer. I called into a number, and the system was told to look at our website and memorize the content of the website. So as a caller, I call in and I say, tell me about the company. What do you offer? What's your management team like? Do you have case studies for X, Y, and Z? And I'll tell you, I'm not for replacing humans, but there's no human that would know how to answer all those questions that were trained by our website. So incredible voice applications, undoubtedly.
That is really cool. Yeah, it's. I think that we are going to have some follow-up guest host appearances where you come on and talk about how things have evolved over the last, 2 months. Probably longer than that, but I mean, it's just happening so fast. There's so much change. It'd be great to kind of catch up again later. This has been a fun topic, and I intended for this to go no longer than 30 minutes, and you and I have pushed that a little past. But it's been great diving into it and getting the perspective for next steps for people that to say this is great. This has been a good 101 for me. I feel like I can walk away and actually get started now. I know a little bit about what's happening with AI. What should next steps be? Particularly if people would like to get plugged into you as an SME and in the area and follow you. What are some resources you throw out to them? You wrote a really cool book. What are some of those things people can look for?
Thank you. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I think my name is spelled correctly there in the left-hand corner. And if you want a more broad view of the research that's going on in the industry, follow a professor at Penn called Ethan Mollick. He wrote a book called Co-Intelligence, which coincided a lot with the basis of my book, as it turns out, which we wrote at about the same time. I was going down the focus of the Microsoft 365 Copilot. He gives a more general, how does the world get along with an AI, which is a good book. And then I would suggest following, there's a podcast that I just found the other day called the AI Breakdown. If you want newsy stuff, check out the AI Breakdown. Very good, up-to-date content, because this race is on. And if you want to follow some of the blur of, as you called it, XAI, Grok, they're in the market now. So there's lots happening, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, it certainly will be. Awesome. Great next steps. I'll put links up on the screen. So if you're all watching this, then you should see some of those up. Of course, they'll be in the comments as well. So you can, find his profile, follow Chris. Definitely recommend that, of course. Take a look at that book. Check out the podcast. Chris, thank you for joining me today. It's been an absolute honor to have you as the first guest host of the show.
Well, as the man with the hat, it's been a pleasure, with or without the hat. I'm trying to break free from it, but we'll see. Time will only tell there. Thank you all for tuning in. Hopefully this was insightful, and hopefully it gave you a good example of how, with future episodes, we will be taking topics that seem cumbersome, that feel difficult, breaking them down into real people terms and making it easy for everyone. The next topic is going to be on
hybrid work and what RTO means there, and really getting into some of the nitty gritty and what that actually means. There's all kinds of headlines about it. Try not to get political on that side of things, but there's a lot to unpack there. So we'll be diving into that. Stay tuned. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next Cutting Through the Noise.